Hello again, and welcome to Module 3. We're going to be talking about working with formulas, everybody's favorite part of Excel, and a very important part of this course. So my own take is that, we learn formulas in a very rote manner. We don't actually think about how they can be used and which is the best one for which situation, and how formulas can actually slow down our work if we don't use them correctly. Like I said, we sort of just learn, hey, here's how VLOOKUP works, here's how sum works, here's how these things work. So in this module, we're going to dig a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about some formula tips I have for you to work with formulas better and more easily, and to save the headache and to read them more easily. Excel has a series of rules and how it calculates, so it uses some preset settings that if we understand, we can actually create faster work. And then finally, we're going to talk about writing better formulas. What does that take and what does it look like? Because in the last module, we talked about this idea of developmental memory. And we can actually place that memory or that work that we've done previously within our formulas if we write them more semantically. So we'll go through some examples and talk about how we can do things differently. So starting out, and in this demo, I'm going to show you some formula editing tips. So here's the first tip. You can actually move the pop-up window that Excel uses to tell you about your formulas. So you may be thinking, what is he talking about? So let's take a look. So in G3, I'm going to type in if, and let's say I want to do some sort of condition. I'm going to click open parenthesis, and you see that it brought up this pop-up box. Now this pop-up box is actually very helpful, right? It tells us what's going to be in this formula, or I should say this function, and it tells us what the arguments are, but it's kind of in the way, because the thing is, I want to get to what's in G4, and those who have done this before know it's a lot of keystrokes here on the arrow keys. I could do it, but I'd much rather just put my mouse over this pop-up until it turns into a four-way crosshair like this. You see, it's exactly like that. I'm going to click and hold, and now I can move this out of the way. So I still get the benefits of it. And now I can just test this. Let's say I want to test if this is greater than some amount. And voila. And you see it still works. So what I can also do is I can go up here and let's say I start typing if, and it doesn't matter if it's an if, it could be any function. I'll put my mouse over here until I see those crosshairs again, and I can move this out of the way. So the next tip I'm going to show you is around instant calculation. So in Excel, to recalculate, or to tell Excel to recalculate a sheet, you can hit the F9 key, and that will always recalculate what you're looking at. So we sort of understand this naturally in some formulas. For instance, let's say I type in rand. Rand is a formula we always expect to recalculate. I'm going to hit the F9 key. You can see I'm hitting it right now. It's recalculating everything, and the rand always changes, right? Well, we can see that. And that's actually what we expect. Rand is a volatile function. It always recalculates on spreadsheet changes, also when you force a calculation by pressing F9. So here's the tip, and I typed that D in just to show you that I've just typed in a random letter and it recalculated. Here's the tip for you. We know that F9 does a cell calculation, but let's say you're in a really complex formula, and this one isn't very complex because I want to keep it simple for the sake of example. But here, I have this if formula, and I have a logical test, and I have a cell here where there's a value that I'm drawing from. So let's say I wanted to instantly know what this value was for G4. Well, what I can do is I can highlight it, and then I can hit that F9 key, which I'm about to do. So you see it plugged in that number. So that's a quick way of finding out what those values mean in your formula. Now, there's a small issue here, and that is you see it put in a raw number here. If I hit enter, it's going to keep this number. So to ensure that it does not keep that number, I'm going to hit escape, which hopefully you know when you're in the formula bar and you hit escape, it will not save changes. So I'll hit escape. So that's just a very quick and easy way to evaluate a formula while you're looking at it. So now we're going to talk about how to add some white space into your formulas. You can see in G3, I've now added on to the example that we had previously, and now we have a longer nested if. Now if you look at this, it's kind of hard to read. So what I want to show you is that you can add some white space to your formulas. And in that way, you can actually make them more readable. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go up into this formula bar. And where I want to add the white space, I'm going to place my cursor. So we're dealing with an if, and I find that when we have nested ifs, or we have ifs with multiple conditions, that it's a good idea to add some white space before the condition. So when you have a long formula like this, it's a good idea to add some white space before the second condition. So if we're talking nested ifs, we have one condition, that's our first one, and then we have our second one. So this is a good spot to where I find it to add some white space. So I'm going to put my cursor right before this if, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Alt-Enter, and you can see that moved it to the next line. So here I can add some indentation. I'll just use my spacebar. I don't think you can use tab here, so we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we have some indentation that lets us know that this is a conditional if, or at least in our minds we sort of think that this if here is conditioned on this. So I feel like the way we've set the text, it's actually a lot easier to understand. So sometimes when we've moved it to another line, that's all we need to do. But here, in my example, I have the if formula returning very long sentences. So sometimes it's not returning long sentences, it's returning a cell value or a number. And that's fine, that's all the white space you need. But I find to go even further in cases like this. So I'll hit Alt-Enter again. I'm just going to bring it in a little bit. My standard amount of spaces is 4 to 5 spaces, depending on what I've written. So here we see that there's a comma, so there's another good spot for white space. So I'll hit Alt-Enter again, space, 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 space. And now we have a better idea of what's going on. And then I'm going to hit Alt-Enter once more, and I'll keep this one sort of out here because it's actually not based off of, it's not part of this if, it belongs to the top if. So it might be a good idea to keep it out here. You may say you find it better over here, partway in between. I'll leave that up to you. So I'll hit Enter here, and now when I click back on G3, you can see that now I actually have a nicely well laid out formula. And what I can do is I can put my mouse over this formula box till I see this up and down crosshair. I can drag that down if I need more space. So take a look at this, and remember, let's just move this guy out of the way because we learned how to do that. So take a look at this. Isn't this much easier to understand? I do believe it is. So let's continue where we left off. I'm back on cell G3, and you see I have these values in here in my nicely well laid out formula. I have this G4 and the G5, and we know what those refer to, right? We know that they refer to the total transactions and the average transactions. However, if I look at this formula, it's not plainly obvious to me how that works. I'd have to actually go and look up what's G4, what's G5. Imagine this is a much bigger, more complex spreadsheet. So one thing I really like to do is create named ranges. We'll go into named ranges in more detail later in this course, but for now we're going to apply them very easily. So over here in G4, I have the total transactions. What I am going to do with G4 select is I'm going to go up here. This is called the name box. I'm going to go in here. You see G4 has been highlighted in there. I will copy right over it. So I'm going to type in total transactions. And just as a general rule, I like to write exactly, even if it's full letters, even if it's long, I like to write exactly what that cell value is for. It really helps if you have a label next to it that can be easily mapped to how you've named it. So what we'll stay away from in this course is giving cell names that sound like engineering variables, or they sound like computer science variables. Let's name it exactly what it is. It doesn't need something like VAL for value. That's what a lot of people I see do online. They'll say V, or they'll say V tote transact. No reason for that. We're going to use full words here. We're going to use English or whatever language you want to do this in. Just make sure that you are using full words. So total transactions, and we see that this name easily maps to this label. So we'll hit enter there. And now I've named that total transactions. I'm going to go to G5, and I see this is called average transactions. So I'm going to go in here. I'll highlight this. I'll type in average transactions like that. I'll hit enter. Okay, so now we've named these, and you can see as I put my mouse over them, they have names. Isn't that great? So let's go back to our formula. Over here in G4, I want to change this to say total transactions. And you see I've started typing in TOT, and down here it popped up. So it knows what I'm talking about. I'll just double click that. And over here, I'm going to type in average transactions. And I'll hit enter. Now I'm going to go back to here. Now, again, very small formula trick, but this is immediately more semantic. I understand slightly better, not fully, what's going on here. And I could even do one better, because here I have these tests that have 100 million and 38 million. I could actually assign 100 million to a cell, and I can give it some sort of named range like transaction test or whatever would be reflective of exactly what I'm trying to test. Imagine this formula has more English words in it, or more language words that we understand semantically than it does numbers and addresses. And in that way, we might understand better when we come back to it. So that's how we input developmental memory into our work. And then finally, some formulas, as we look at this one in cell G3, it's not very hard, but some of them are much bigger and much harder. And in those cases, what you'll do, if you really want to understand them and evaluate them, let's say you're having trouble with one of them, what you can do is go to the Formulas tab, and then over in Formula Auditing, in this group, there's this button here that says Evaluate Formula. I'm going to click it, and here we go. What it can do is allow us to evaluate this formula step by step. So I'll click Evaluate. It's going to tell me what it's doing. It's going to test if that's greater than that. You see that's true, so it makes sense that we go to this next part, and so forth. And we can scroll down. We could step in if we have multiple compounding conditions. We can step out if we want to move out of an if formula, if we have tons of nested ifs, things like that. So this is a very good tool. Unfortunately, it only gives you a box of this size. So if you have a really long formula, sometimes it's hard to figure out what's going on. But if you use this tool slowly and methodically, it's easy to pick up after a while.